What's up, everybody? Hello and welcome to Final Boss, episode number 62 of your Endgame rating show. My name is Adam K, aka Bay, and today's show is, hopefully we can get it all done. I want to preface this real quick by saying that everyone in the community, between MMO Champion, between Reddit, between our email, between Twitter, between the live stream, has submitted so much awesome stuff. It obviously cannot all be covered. And we're not also going to credit every single person individually that did submit something. Just know that you helped build probably the largest set of show notes in the history of this show. Well, let's see if we can get through it all right now. But first, before we see our special guests, Anna's right over here. Where's Anna? There she is. Hi, Anna.
Yeah, here I am. Hey, everybody. Great to see everyone today. I also got lots and lots of feedback for this show from plenty of people who wanted to hear us ask our favorite developers all their burning questions for the expansion. So it's great to see everybody today, and I'm glad so many people have come out to watch the show.
I'm glad you survived the move. I think I want to put that in there, too. You look like you've survived almost unscathed. You all good? You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good to go. Sorry, there's probably like boxes and such behind me.
It's fine.
But I'm here in my own place. I have unfortunately the crappy sounding mic, but I got most everything else set up, so we should be good.
I think we'll fight through it. So
yeah, somehow.
Today's show we are interviewing class designer and lead game designer. We have on the show with us, we have Hazzikostas and Kris Zierhut. Chris, hello, welcome to the show for your first time.
Good to be here.
And then Ian, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, glad to be back.
And I hope this time we can get enough stuff talked about where the internet reels from it all. Last time, I mean, we still have comments on the episode we had on you before. People like still talking about this and that and the other thing. Well, this changed and that, what about that? It happens. That's how it works. So
we will try to break the internet. Hopefully not Kim Kardashian style, but we'll see what we can do.
Oh no! Right, exactly. So again, Anna, take it away. Who are our guests today? Who are these fine gentlemen?
Well, I'd like to hear from them what it is that they do so that they can explain to our viewers what they do for Blizzard and why we care about what they have to say on all these different topics. So, Chris, let's go with you because you have not been on the show before, and you are the lead class designer. Now, what precisely does that mean?
I oversee a small group of people who do all of the class design. Our biggest project for Warlords of Draenor was designing all the new talents, the level 100 talents, the minor Draenor perks you get when you're leveling up your character, and all of the class changes. So all those buttons that got removed from the game, things that got streamlined, new functionality got added. My team worked on doing all of that, as well as being heavily involved in item design and other parts of the game systems.
Excellent. Great. Well, then I'm sure we've got lots of questions for you about how classes are working. And Ian, just give us a little primer for the people who didn't see you on the show last time. So you are a lead game designer on World of Warcraft.
Yes, I'm one of the lead game designers. My background is primarily focused around overseeing the team that creates the raid and dungeon content, most of the multiplayer PvE content that goes into the game, but also involved in various systems, achievements, rewards, all that stuff, just kind of helping provide input and guidance where possible.
Lots of hats, I think is the way to put it in the film terminology.
Yep.
Yeah.
Many hats.
Many hats, indeed.
Many hats.
That's fine. Hopefully there's some fancy ones in there too. And to open this up, to go right into this, the biggest thing I wanted to just give a little bit of again, another primer for, if you guys want to talk about this real quick, about how the launch is going and how it happened. And there was some turmoil when it first came out, and everyone's like, oh, we can't log into the game, and it's all craziness. And then like we got the numbers back, and you guys broke 10 million subscribers again. So did you have a way to like express and summarize to the community real quick about just how large of a process this was and how big Warlords of Draenor is for Blizzard and for Warcraft in general?
I mean, Warlords is a huge expansion. I think there's no two ways about it. Feature by feature, the Garrisons feature is probably the single largest feature we've ever put in a WoW expansion. And overall, I think, we're super excited. It's been a heck of a roller coaster ride the last few weeks since launch. Really glad that we were able to get things, stabilized. And I think we were giving everybody a good gameplay experience a few days after launch. And then, of course, gave the 5 days of compensation to sort of help make up for that initial rough patch. But yeah, it really was, just an all hands on deck, period, particularly
Right,
during those first
right,
few days,
right.
particularly during that first week. I mean, really, people here 24/7 around the clock, working in shifts in many cases, like
That's what we heard. Yeah.
server
Right.
engineers going home, sleeping for 5 or 6 hours in the middle of the day, then coming back in.
That's not an exaggeration. That's literally
That is literally what the first week was
Right.
until
Wow.
everyone
Wow.
had a good experience.
And they did a phenomenal job. They had some experimental new tech that they just rolled out faster than they had planned on rolling out that let them bring in way more people into the servers than they thought were possible before.
Yeah, I mean,
They did an
ultimately,
amazing job.
yep. I mean, ultimately, I think like we're excited, we're humbled by the overall reception of the game, by the number of people that have returned to check it out and have been enjoying playing Warlords. You know, I think as with all things, you make estimates. You try to be generous in some of your projections and plan for worst case scenarios, and then even worse, or well, better
Or
as
in
the
this case,
case may
good.
be.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah,
happened,
right.
and yeah, really, it's amazing heroics by our server team and just everybody else working in support of the game to get it back together and running smoothly.
But at this point, WoW can handle more people logged in than it's ever been able to handle before. So it's really in great shape and should be running really well.
Right. I mean, and that's how the community. It's funny how it flips, and like everyone thinks like, oh, this architecture is terrible and it's so bad they weren't ready. But you can't, arguably, you cannot even anticipate or be ready for 3 million more people.
Right.
And how
a 50%
large-
climb, right? when you
Right.
think
Yeah.
about
Exactly.
it. It's
Compared
huge.
to how it's wild.
Yeah,
And
about
you guys did a
even
great
with how
job.
many people were playing at Cataclysm launch, I think, if I was looking at the
Yeah.
numbers right.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting. I remember that launch, and then so it's interesting to look back and think that there are about the same number of people playing now.
And it's overall better for us that play World of Warcraft, because that just means our community has grown back to where it almost was at this peak, and that's incredible for a almost 10-year-old game. That's awesome.
In particular, a lot of people who have been gone since Burning Crusade are back. That's
Right.
been one of the notable things. Like, I haven't played since Burning Crusade, or I haven't played since Lich King. Is a common thing you'll hear from people you're talking to. It's just a lot of people pick this expansion and the themes around it to come back because they're so excited about it.
Yeah, particularly in older
Well,
guilds, older servers, it's fun seeing people come out of the woodwork. It's
Right.
like, holy crap, you're still alive.
That's probably why some servers had such a hard problem. It's like it was the last server they were on when they stopped playing, and they all came back to that server, and just it was hard to handle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it looks a whole lot like BC, so I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of people who quit it.
yeah,
Yeah,
BC
there's a lot of
wanna come back
nostalgia there
for-
for DC.
A little
Yeah.
bit. Just a little bit. So now,
Yeah.
some of the new things, though, not as much the nostalgia moments. I wanted to get into some Garrison stuff real quick here, because the new feature, the new shiny, as it was that you just said, Ian. And we're going to kind of go rapid fire through this chat room, so just sit tight, hold on to your butts, as it were, because we have lots of topics to, like, chunk through here in our limited amount of time with these gentlemen. So, the first thing that came up recently was brought to my attention that there is this Garrison companion app. Now, as like the community is all freaking out, they want this in the game. They want this to be.
Do you mean like a desktop streamer? Yeah, because
Right. Well, so you can use other ways to log into your, but there's an actual leaked app online that this YouTuber is talking about, and I wanted to squelch this right now. Is this a real thing, Ian, Chris? Is this actually a thing?
Don't believe everything you see on the internet.
It's about.
It's a general rule. It's good advice to follow in life.
Don't
Right.
believe most
all we're
things
gonna get
on the
is a
internet
general
until we see
rule.
it somewhere else, and yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, I mean, obviously, it's something that we realize would be awesome, but yeah, I would, if look for information from official sources, and
Correct.
yes,
Okay. Good.
well, we'll bookmark this and come back to it later if anything like that comes out in the future.
okay.
So
Right, I mean,
half
so-
there, half answer.
There was a huge AMA that just happened on Reddit the other day with a whole bunch of the team, more than we have obviously on the show today right now. So obviously there's a lot of other little tidbits we're not gonna get into on the show today, but yeah, if you want more little bits and pieces, you can go to the AMA on Reddit. But the next one I want to talk about real quick was the
Garrison raid rewards. is stepping
yeah.
up.
I mean, Anna, have you experienced much of this right now? Like how fast you can actually gear up before raids came out last Tuesday? What,
I haven't experienced it myself because I'm very behind on my raid prep due to the timing of the launch of this expansion.
Oh my
But
goodness.
I have seen other people obtain them, and I also thought that they would take a whole lot longer. Was this planned? Were you supposed to get raid relevant rewards out of Garrisons so quickly?
Yeah, it's totally fine that if you leveled up your followers very quickly and aggressively, some people even got one whole island level 655 piece,
Yep.
which will single-handedly ensure the defeat of Mythic Imperator Margok.
Of course
Uh-huh.
it will.
That's,
Well,
that's pretty much how it
along with
goes,
the
you
You
know?
can likewise get a 655 crafted piece, so it's not really that
Yeah.
different. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Along with all of the 655 level BOEs that are all up on the auction house. for
Right.
this really
Mm-hmm. So that was all the plan, because you have the Garrison rating, the BOE drops from the world, the Apexis Crystal farming for the Arakoa gear, the challenge mode dailies, which I will comment on. That's actually kind of fun that we can do that as a gear up method, because in MoP it was new and it's like he did it after the fact. So
if you recall, Matt Goss speaking on the presentation we did at BlizzCon, he's like, we want to get items coming from more different sources, and we achieved that. That's awesome, actually.
Yeah. No, that is 100% true. There are items all over the place, and it's hard on stream. People are like, what's the best way to gear up for raids? And I'm just like, there's so many. Yeah, play the game, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I think philosophically, it's no different from how the pre-raid period has worked, I think, in almost every expansion. I mean, there's always items like crafted items, Dark Moon card items, used to be Valor items. There are things that are competitive and relevant alongside, normal introductory raid gear that you can get before raids open. Ultimately, Mythic raid gear is going to be the best stuff that you can get for raiding. High-end PvP gear is going to be the best stuff you can get for PvP. But early on, it's actually kind of cool to have all these things be relevant.
Right. No, it is. And again, the caveat is that challenge modes, I think, feel really fun to do right now.
Yeah.
At the beginning, right now. Because you can't get any better than 630 gear. And to confirm that, set bonuses are turned off, tertiaries are turned off, and extra sockets are turned off, correct?
Yep.
In challenge mode.
In challenge
modes,
yes.
Yes.
So I think, you're not going to see that power creep over the course of the expansion like you did in Mists. I think for some people, the earliest experience with challenge modes was a bit harder than it's going to end up being because you didn't necessarily have a 630 in every single slot.
Right.
Or more importantly, you probably, unless you were just really, really rich, you didn't have the very best enchants.
Right.
You're probably not putting 15 temporal crystals worth of enchant on a random dungeon blue that you got, right? So as you get raid gear that you start splurging on and putting the very best stuff on, that will help you in challenge modes too. But that's about it.
And you really just have to finish them. I mean, that's all
the gear right now.
Do.
Yeah.
So, and we saw last expansion how challenge modes got progressively easier just as class design changed over the course of the expansion. So it would be kind of disappointing if everyone was just landing gold straight off the bat.
Yeah, and I think actually that's one of the things that I'm probably happiest about with how the challenge mode dailies worked out. I think in Mists, even though you had the daily challenge mode that gave a bunch of valor at the end, there was still this very much gold or bust mentality. You'd hear about groups going in for the very first time and just chain resetting and never even finishing a run because the second something went wrong and they felt like gold was out of reach, they didn't really see what the point was.
Right.
Whereas now most groups running it, at least during these weeks, aren't really stressing about time. I mean, some might push a bit hard to try to get silver, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's just doing a really hard dungeon for upgrades. Sure. And it's been a long time since that's been a thing that's existed in WoW, and it's pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it feels really all right.
Well, that's good to hear that that's something that you're satisfied with, because I think it's something that a lot of people have enjoyed.
Yeah, we've heard nothing but positive feedback on that, honestly.
Awesome. How about the raid mission spawn rate in your garrisons? Now, the other way to gear up I've heard that if you win your raid mission, it takes longer to respawn, and if you fail it, it'll respawn sooner? Or is it just an arbitrary amount of time that the system mission backend rolls before you get into the raid mission?
Neither. Success or failure doesn't matter. I don't know that I would call it arbitrary. I mean, I think there are a lot of, there are inner workings to the system. They're not intentionally all laid out like an open book for players.
Okay.
It's designed to be a nice bonus that will supplement the gear that you're getting from primary raid sources, going in, killing bosses. As we said when we talked about this feature during beta, it's really a drop in the bucket compared to the loot you're getting from actually killing bosses and using bonus rolls and all those other mechanisms. When those missions pop up, they should feel like a really cool perk and something that you get excited about sending your followers out to go do.
Absolutely. There was just weird conjecture that how do I get them or how fast they respond. So, okay. I actually failed a 98% before the show today.
That happened.
It happens.
Yeah, a friend of mine did that. Kira actually did that. The Kira, the author of Warcraft Logs, and then he said he was going to send all those followers to work in the mine forever.
Yeah. So, and how about people have been wondering about the meta game for garrisons for level 100 epic XP capped followers? They get nothing from the rewards except they get the bonus. Is there going to be a possible system in the future where the XP turns into something else for them? Because eventually you're not going to have anyone to level unless you have an inn. So do you have plans for that?
We don't have a specific plan in place. It's definitely something we're going to talk about. I mean, I think the XP missions still remain useful since it takes quite a while before everyone has all their followers leveled up to epic. So even if you're sending an epic alongside, an uncommon and rare quality follower, those missions remain useful. I think as you get to higher item levels on your followers, like there aren't item level 645 XP missions, for example.
Right.
So I think they're naturally going to sort of be filtered out as your followers get more into the true end game. But we'll definitely, be talking about and extending the system in ways that make sense going forward throughout the expansion.
Okay. Yeah, on the AMA, it was noted that there's probably plans for future stuff for Garrisons. Yeah. So this isn't it. You're not just like, this is the whole only thing for Garrisons and it's just done. Right. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Anna, what did you guys say? What?
No, I mean, I was thinking that we could move along to some raid loot discussion.
You bring this one up, please, because I've brought it up on the show before, and I get kind of a little bit like, whew. So yeah, go for it, Anna. Go for it.
Oh, we've got my topics on that later, but I'll bring up one of your favorites right now.
Go for it.
We would love to discuss Warforged gear in Mythic raids. Are you happy with putting Warforged gear in Mythic raids? Is that something, the implementation that you're satisfied with, or gem sockets and tertiary and sort of randomization on the loot that you get out of the very best raid level?
That's not a leading question at all.
No, not at all.
In general, I would describe, honestly, I think that our item bonus system is one of the things that we're happiest with at all levels, whether it's quest rewards randomly upgrading as you level up, dungeon rewards, and yes, raid loot up to and including Mythic raid gear. I think if Mythic loot couldn't be Warforged, for example, I think that would actually, rather than sort of emphasize the value of Mythic loot, it would make it feel worse compared to heroic loot, because it would actually shrink the gap between the heroic Warforged or heroic socketed or both items that you can get and what is theoretically supposed to be the best stuff out there. It remains, I think, for all guilds, really, you're going to be killing these bosses multiple times. And the reasons that we like Warforged, socketed tertiaries as a system apply just as much to Mythic as to any other difficulty. Whether you are Method or Paragon or Midwinter or Blood Legion or whoever, going in and clearing out the raid in the first couple of weeks and then farming it to prepare for the next tier, or whether you're, a rank 1000 guild that is killing a new boss every week or every couple of weeks and slowly working your way through the zone, you're killing Kargath a whole bunch of times. You're killing the Butcher a whole bunch of times. And there is value, I know there's the whole, like, do you raid for loot or do you loot so that you can raid dichotomy. Getting upgrades generally feels good, particularly when you're not having to re-enchant and reforge and everything every piece as you get them. And knowing that, hey, yeah, this is our 8th Kargath kill, but I could get lucky. I could actually get a Warforged socketed version of the Blade Fist to replace my regular Blade Fist. It's something to potentially look forward to. And at the end of the day, you're going to replace those items with Foundry loot, with loot from the next raid tier after that, regardless. So it's not like, oh, this is, influencing the fate of your character in perpetuity. But in the interim, I think it feels good to get upgrades.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think I thought that the Warforged system was great, like in dungeons and normal modes and heroic raiding. I've always felt like that the raiders that are going to raid Mythic raids are going to still raid it and farm it as long as it's the current content anyway. And I guess it always felt sort of like an interesting place that when you kill the hardest boss in the game, you don't actually have a chance to get the best loot in the game.
I think you're also missing about half the Mythic audience, which are the people who go through Heroic first and then go through Mythic, and maybe they don't get the whole zone down. Maybe they get through half the zone or 2/3 of the zone, and for them, those upgrades feel really, really good.
Right, sure.
And it's also, the same way item upgrades work to some extent for the group that is working on the final boss in week 14, week 15 of the tier. That trickle of extra chances to get Warforged item, to get extra socketed items, again, helps them get over those hurdles. Yep. It helps their overall item level and average player power be higher in relative terms than it was for groups that were getting there in week 4 or week 5.
He's farming every week, you get a little bit stronger, ultimately.
No, absolutely.
My only concern with the Warforged system that we saw last expansion, and I know my concerns are different than Bay's, is that it made there be a larger difference between guilds that had been farming heroic for longer and had a higher quantity of Warforged gear than guilds that had been farming for less long. And the reason why that was an issue was then we went into the next tier and then we felt like the bosses at least were a little bit easier than we had expected them to be, and that's because we had more Warforged gear. I mean, is that something that we should expect to see in the future if we've got just higher eye level across the board, or was that mostly Valor gear, or that was really my concern.
I mean, I think that was the upgrades as well as Warforged. I mean, if you
Yeah.
think back to that, upgrades were 8 item levels, Warforged were 6. I think it was the two combined that really added up to like a full tier's worth of power. And I think we also learned lessons from that. Going in retrospect, could normal Siege of Orgrimmar have dropped slightly higher eye level gear, and could heroic in turn have been tuned for that slightly higher eye level of gear? Probably yes. And it was I think problematic that you had guilds coming into Siege with an average item level of like 547 or 548, when full normal mode Siege gear was 553. It left like virtually no room for differentiation between people who had farmed Siege a whole bunch and those who were just coming in fresh from Heroic Throne.
Yeah, following that, we probably are going to have a little bit larger gap between raid tiers than we had in the past to help with that problem. And we've made the room for it. So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. You've done all this work with the eye level squish, so
Right.
I hope that's more room.
Yeah, because that was my little devil's advocate tagline here. Is that doesn't the crazy jumps in eye level now just propagate the whole reason why you had the squish in the first place?
So the squish was not a one-time thing. It's going to have
okay.
to happen again in the future.
Okay.
The nature of a game like this, you have to have a percentage increase in power for it to feel good. Percentage increase in power is the very definition of an exponential curve. So guess what? It's going to happen again, but it should be a few years out.
Okay.
Now, are you still happy with Warforged on trinkets and weapons? I know those are the specific gear pieces that people have talked about Warforged being mostly a problem on. It's because it's so much of a bigger swing on a weapon or on a trinket.
It's definitely a somewhat larger swing, but I mean, the weapon or trinket dropping versus not dropping is equally large. I mean, it's kind of part and parcel of those item slots having greater importance than, let's say, a bracer or a ring. There's some value in just having consistency rather than a whole bunch of extra special rules that players need to learn about and keep track of in their heads. Like, okay, there's this system that applies to loot, but not for these 2 or 3 slots, versus, this is just how loot works across the board.
Warforged is also about the item being exciting, and if it's Warforged on a weapon, it's even more exciting. I don't see the harm.
Okay.
From an enjoyment point of view, it's the best we can have.
That's fair. You can just quelling things and getting stuff worked out there. All right. Yeah, because I know people are always like dreading, like, oh, they're going to squish again, but that just, like what Chris said, that just sort of has to be the way it goes around to keep the game
It's
healthy.
unavoidable.
Right.
And I know that you guys are aware that not every player is on that same page, but we know y'all's page, and all that matters is that we have fun when we're playing the game. So
That is what matters.
Yep.
Exactly. So, little things now. A couple questions here. Any new updates about ranged classes having their spells and abilities land on different areas of the target's body? This is back in circa 2012. So anything updates for that?
We have plans on that. We actually have internal work being done on trying to make our combat a little bit more cool. And they're looking a lot at the visuals in the game. One of our early passes that actually made into Warlords was trying to reduce the visual clutter so you can actually see what's going on in a raid instead of so much soup of spell effects. But they're also looking at making spell effects look cooler. And part of that is every single projectile and particle not landing on that exact same little point. If it spreads out across the boss, it looks way cooler. So that's still something I think we'll get in the future. Not in the 6.0 time frame, but
all those cool spell effects.
Yeah.
Clearly, we need more of them.
Right. Well, hey, Anna, come on now. Your crazy nightlight buddy is gone. You can see yourself now. Okay, it's okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like everything on fighting a dragon, everything hits its neck. Everything hits its neck.
Right. And some things hit the neck, some hit the tail, some hit the body, some hit the head. That kind of effect.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no question that it looks weird, particularly when there's like a specific point on its neck, and all the missiles are corkscrewing towards that point. Then as the dragon rears back to breathe, suddenly every fireball that's in midair like jerks in midair to reorient itself. That's not optimal. Right. No question that we can do better.
All right, that would look awesome. I think now with the visual upgrades and how like the fidelity of the game is improving, I think that would be an awesome next step too.
We will always be improving the fidelity. The visual look of the game is something we can't let stand still. It's a 10-year-old game, but if you look at the game, it doesn't have the 10-year-old graphics. It's
pretty good.
Yep. I mean, it's a collaboration between our artists and our engine team and programmers, and we're just we're looking at it as a massive, unending project where we're just going to tackle one piece at a time. And obviously, character models and animations were the primary focus this time around.
Sure.
There's a whole lot more still left to do.
Right.
Oh, I know Melee noticed all of the awesome visual improvements, especially when we're doing a boss like Tectus. Definitely lots and lots of visuals on that one.
No, it's good. I don't see like the meteors and the cataclysms and the craziness all over my head. I can like, oh, there's my panda. Like, yeah,
There's my
it's
guy.
good. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's perfect, but just imagine how much worse it could be.
Oh, I did.
Better.
Anna, next question, Anna. You got it?
We're gonna ask about the dungeon journal and prior expansion raids.
Yes. Can that be filled
Are we
in?
gonna have any updates to the dungeon journal for old raids there?
It's something we eventually want to do. It's not quite as pressing, just because I'm not sure how many people are like trying to do a Burning Crusade raid at level 90 or 100 and unable to succeed because they don't quite understand the mechanics. It's on our list of things to do, but at the end of the day, like, it boils down to resources, and I know people get, there's always this, but you make all these millions of dollars, you should just hire someone and have them do it.
Right.
Okay, so let's say we hire someone. Again, it's always a question of how do we allocate their time?
Right.
And is it worth having someone sit down and spend weeks going through every old encounter to update the dungeon journal? Or should we have them do something more pertinent and more relevant to current content? So we'll get to it eventually, but it's definitely not a high priority.
Okay. It's just going back and looking through the dungeon journal, who now I bet you can, I don't know if you can see the analytics of how many times it gets opened by characters and gets paged through versus other add-ons that used to do this back in the day. But it looks weird when you go back through the old expansions and you try to look like, well, I can't remember who drops this, and the raids are grayed out. So that's it. Just came up in the email. Now, a point of contention. This question came up so many times over the last week.
Oh yeah, I got that one. Can we have Admiral Taylor's greatsword be transmoggable, please? I really
I'm
like
not sure
that.
why it isn't, but we can certainly look at it.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it. Okay.
I've got another general question for these guys before we go into the break, since I know we have so much to do.
Generally,
Sure.
We let you transmog anything that doesn't look ridiculous, and anything that doesn't supposed to be some iconic, unique thing, right? Beyond that, transmog's supposed to be pretty open, so probably just got missed.
Okay.
Now, I know we have a whole lot to do after the break with regard to class design, especially in raids, but I do have a general question for you guys that I guess the topic just came up.
Yep.
I know you put a lot of work into lowering the visual overload in melee range because there were a lot of complaints about that last expansion, and then we saw a whole lot of the work that had been done, but I know I've heard pretty much unanimously from the melee that I've spoken to that it's maybe equally bad, if not perhaps a little bit worse. The pet pile is worse because we can bring more people into the raid. Fire elementals are, my favorite friend in the universe when they're right on top of me. And then we have encounters like Tectus, which are great with awesome visuals for the bad stuff on the ground. But then there's a whole lot of our friends and their, offensive spell effects in the way. Are you satisfied with the work you've done on that, or do you think that there's going to be more?
There's going to be more.
Okay.
I think there's no question that pets in particular are something that we can improve. We do a lot to diminish the impact of visual impact or outright hide visual particles that are associated with allied player spell effects, because you really don't need to see every missile from the wild imps from the Warlords of Draenor, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's trickier to to hide the physical 3-dimensional hunter pet or fire elemental. There are design changes we can make to some of those. We've talked about one option in the past being turning the fire elemental into a ranged nuker that does the exact same damage throughput-wise, so that it's naturally going to stand 20 yards back if you're an elemental shaman or resto shaman sending it in from far away. Things like that. So we don't by no means do we think our job is done on that front.
We did make a little bit of improvement in the pets now should be trying to spread out a little bit more, so they won't be all on one giant pile, or maybe that causes new problems.
Maybe that causes new problems.
If you've done Butcher, I don't know if you've done Butcher from melee range, but they still all sit there's 3 piles around the boss, and they still all sit in the back. So I'm not sure if they're spreading out.
They're all in one pile, or they're in...
They usually are between the 2 triangle
pile.
points, because you put the two stack groups, all the pets are right there between his legs.
Yeah, we might need to widen the range on that or something. Yeah.
The reason, the question that I would have as a follow-up is why didn't you guys go the way that other games have gone, where you can turn it up or down on a player basis? Because there are different players who want to see more or less. Obviously, I want to see less. A PvPer really wants to see a whole lot more. And there's a range of, somebody in a raid with less people wants to see more, and in a raid with more people wants to see less. Why do you do it from your end instead of giving us more just a dial?
Ultimately, I think it's about having a consistent look to the game. They're definitely, the extreme option is something like, I want to hide everything. And to some extent, that we have a certain look and feel for the game that we would like to sustain and keep consistent. We don't want you to be able to, hide everyone around you and have the feel of the encounter be like just playing in a vacuum. You look at other games like StarCraft 2, for example, where a lot of pros like play at absolute min settings.
Min settings, yeah.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
to some extent, I think you lose something there. When you're looking at how the game is being streamed, how it's being projected out elsewhere, and we'd rather continue to work within a kind of a consistent universe rather than pass the buck to some extent and say like, okay, it's not our problem to solve. We gave you these sliders and hopefully you know how to use them, but the default experience is going to be kind of a mess. We want the default experience to be good.
Okay.
Yeah,
fair.
I mean, that's fair, and that makes a whole lot of sense. And since Chet keeps asking about it, what about those sand piles on Tectus? Is that intended?
Oh, no.
I mean, it's just like it came up like 20 times in chat. The sand piles on Tectus when the boss dies. I actually think it's a mechanic that the boss dies, and then you're not supposed to, kite the boss over the sand piles, because then you can't see anything on the ground. I mean, is it supposed to be like that?
It's realism. Sand is opaque.
Okay. There we go.
There it is. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a problem for Mythic only,
Yeah.
because you can't see the swirls because they hit the total flat axis of the ground, but the sand is over it. That's the main problem. You can still see the red smoke, but not the spire.
I thought it was a mechanic. People have told me it's a bug. Now we know.
I would say it's neither mechanic nor bug. I mean,
Okay.
the boss dissolves into a pile of sand. The pile of sand has a visual representation. One of the consequences of a visually represented pile of sand is that you can't see a thing under it.
Under it. Okay.
Got it.
You could not be under it.
All right. So confirmed. Don't stand in the sand.
Now
It's
we
just
know.
like fire. Pretty much. All right, cool. Very, very good. I like it. All right. Well, we're going to come back from a little bit of a break here real quick and talk about some things you guys may not have heard about and show you all the War Crimes teaser trailer. But first, of course, people have always asked me about how to support Final Boss TV, and of course, in the War Crimes, craziness going on right now, which on the front page of our website, we have a big post right now, how to support Final Boss TV, with pertinent links to stuff and information about things, which we'll plug a bit more and talk about a little more around Christmas time. We had a big donation drive we did last year to upgrade the show and stuff like that. But all it's right there on the front page of Final Boss TV, and that link is right down below. And of course, if you've missed past episodes, our YouTube page link is down below as well. Which let's scroll through real quick here. Still going. Yeah, still going. Yeah, there's a lot of episodes here. We're still going. So if you've missed anything, if you've missed our specials, if you've missed our extra interviews, if you've missed Trivial Pursuit, if you've missed the previous dev interviews, they're all right there on the YouTube page. Links are down below. And without further ado, I want to show you all, if you haven't seen it already before, and if you have, the hype train will probably start up in chat because everyone's like, oh, that's so good. Novel, myself, and Silver Latomi over the next year and a half of our lives are converting the new novel War Crimes by Christy Golden into a 10-part machinima web series. And the teaser trailer is right here. I think. Yes. Yes, it is. It's right here.
Have you ever wanted to rewrite history? To go back, fix mistakes, do it better? What if it were possible to shape and mold time as you would a ball of clay? What possibilities await? What new worlds could we create?
So there was a little taste of just the teaser trailer for the upcoming War Crimes project. If you want to be involved, if you are a 3D model with 3ds Max or Maya, if you are a 2D artist or a fledgling voice actor, then just send an email over to finalbosswow@gmail.com. That's the best way to be involved in this huge community project. Some amazing people are already attached. Jesse Cox, Wow Krendor, Duck Sauce, again, Nobble the Noble, and myself, Silver the Tomy. So we have a lot of work ahead of us to bring this thing to life, and if you want to be a part of it, email is right there. That's enough about that. Let's get back into talking about classes, and we're going to jump into rapid fire so many classes right now to get as much feedback as we can from the awesome devs here. So to some general class stuff right now. You went over before on the previous interview you guys had with Convert to Raid, but just to confirm it again, are there plans to tweak numbers before High Mall Mythic opens up this Tuesday?
Yes. So oftentimes it's difficult to get the classes entirely balanced the way we want them until we get a massive amount of data.
Right.
We get them close, but getting that first raid week's worth of data where we can crunch all those numbers, look at where classes are, what they're performing in the actual raid with actual players. And then we look at the people a little too high, a little too low, and try to adjust it. Mostly taking the people who are too low and bringing them up. So it's going to be mostly in the form of buffs to those who are underperforming. But yeah, there will be some changes made. They'll probably go live sometime tomorrow.
Okay. Right, because there are some...
But we're talking in that 5 to 10% range, not huge changes.
I would say closer to 5 than 10.
Yes.
Okay. Are there going to be, you said buffs now, are there going to be some tweaks down to like the top tier classes right now that are arguably pulling 4,000 to 6,000 more DPS than the middle of the range classes? There are some outliers right now that the top guilds could just stack.
I'm not sure there are many who are consistently pulling 4 to 6K more. I think a couple that are probably on our radar, sorry, it's going to piss some people off, but they're coming. They're somewhat needed. I would say, if I had to pick out 2 specs, I'd probably say Mark's Hunter and Windwalker Monk. And overall, the goal is for both of those to be super strong specs. It's more that, Mark's Hunters and Hunters as a whole obviously have a lot of mobility. And yes, Mark's is going to do better when stationary than not by virtue of their mastery, but they shouldn't outright be beating less mobile classes on a fight like Butcher. So when we see Mark's near the very top of the rankings on a fight like Butcher, that's a little bit concerning. And then similarly, Windwalker, they both have extremely strong single target and phenomenal cleave.
Right.
So it's like when they're at the top of a fight like Butcher and then like completely dominant on a fight like Tectus or Ogron with sustained cleave, it feels like they should be dominant on one, but not both. Like, it's really cool to have a niche. It's a problem if your niche is, well, I'm the best at single target and the best at cleave. Or I'm the best at being stationary and the best at moving.
Being the best at multiple things is what you're going to...
That's called a Mists of Pandaria Warlock.
Oh, no! Oh, no!
Yes.
Ian! Oh, Ian.
Yeah, it's the,
that's not the heat. That's a blindside. That's awesome, though. That's funny. But yeah, it's true. It's true. Or Burning Crusade Warlock. There you go, too.
The Burning Crusade Warlock is you push 2 repeatedly.
Right.
And you were top damage.
You can't beat the boss with that.
And you were top damage. Right, okay. Now, you brought up... Oh, my gosh, there goes chat room. You brought up the class design philosophy, right, with having niches, right? Now, I'm going to bring up some things. I'm going to, use myself as a guinea pig here. You bring up, is there a class design philosophy where class or spec X can be better at AoE, weaker at single target, or class and spec Y is greater at single target, but weak at AoE, or even class and spec Z is like meh at both until execute range, and they do crazy damage?
So, as far as single target damage goes, we think that's where everyone has to be in fairly equal. Specifically, when you're talking about warriors, that means that, it means you do less damage early on and a lot more damage at the end because of the execute mechanic. But that's a signature mechanic of warriors that if anybody should have, they should. Then once you get beyond single target damage, some people might be good at cleave, fighting 2 or 3 targets. Some people might be really good at massive AoE or burst AoE or AoE over time, or have some other cool utility or functionality that their spec brings. They can off heal or whatever. We want everyone to have different strengths and weaknesses so they all feel cool and sometimes overpowered, but not all the time.
Yeah, and even single target damage has sub niches, right? There's single target low movement, single target high movement. There's single target that's burst dependent. There's a lot of variety within that. So I think we're kind of aiming for sort of single target damage in a sort of average sense is kind of one of those middle of the road universal things. But in many ways, I think the game is more interesting and class balance is probably more satisfying with more niches versus homogeneity. If the meters looked the same on every single fight, and we kind of distilled classes down to the sort of lowest common denominator of everyone's pretty good at everything, I think that's a less satisfying place to ultimately be than, okay, these classes are going to shine on this subset of fights that involve multi-dotting. These other classes are going to shine in this subset of fights that have, low mobility single target versus large target AoE versus a number of other things.
Okay.
Well, and since we talked about executes, this came up a couple times in chats too. What about Korog? Is that a bug? His execute phase? No, that's the way it's supposed to be. I know it's dependent on his shield. But
Yes, it's when Korag's shield is in execute range, you can use your executes on him.
Okay.
okay. I see, because that's been
'Cause he-
confusing a whole lot of people. It's not very visually obvious
No.
to the players that like your execute lights up and then you can't push it. So
Yeah, like he has 2 health bars is the way I've always seen that fight, where he has a replenishing health bar that's like armor, which is
Yeah.
his shield, and then he has health. So yeah, he has like a double execute, for how many phases you get to. Yeah, actually, I go. Okay, just to confirm that. And I brought up some stats on the screen while you guys were talking about how like a warrior has no damage until they can spam execute, and then
I wouldn't say
like,
no damage. They just have more
right,
damage.
they have more damage, but then they feel. Is that a good way to feel as a warrior? Like you're waiting for like the boss to be almost dead before you like feel like you're doing.
Or it's
good
that you're
damage?
getting really excited as that 20% mark is coming.
Yeah.
And that's what I remember as, I think back to raids like Molten Core and Blackwing Lair when warriors were the only class that had an execute mechanic, and they were crazy excited when they get to an encounter that had lots of time where they're below 20%. It just feels really good. And I don't think that's a problem.
I mean, and ultimately, obviously, it could go too far. Like, clearly, if you just feel like you're hitting like a wet noodle for,
Right.
7 minutes, then you get to be cool for 90 seconds.
Right.
That's a problem, but I don't think that's where warriors are. I think, first off, they're probably leading off by blade storming a bunch of stuff, and so it takes like 3 minutes for the rest of the raid to catch up to them. And then it kind of averages out, then execute picks it up at the end. I mean, what we've seen in the past, where execute was more watered down, when it was proccing constantly from sudden death, that actually took away what has long been one of the signature warrior strengths and moments at the end of a fight. And so we kind of consciously moved back in that direction.
Okay. So it was a conscious thing. All right, to have those sort of boundings. Okay. All right. Anna, want to take us into healing, and then I'll kind of go into a little bit more healing here. We go into healing for warlords before we get into specific classes.
well, it seems like there is a three-pronged style for how the healing classes are working in Warlords. There's a single target, which is dominated by Holy Paladins and Disc Priests. AoE, dominated by Resto Druids and Holy Priests. And then supportive healing, which is Resto Shaman and Mistweaver Monk. Are you happy with the way that this has worked out? Are there tweaks that you're intending to make? How are you basically feeling about healing right now?
So, what we've looked at numbers so far on healing is the healers are all fairly close in their performance. Maybe Resto Shaman's a little bit low, so we might see a little bump on them to get them up to wherever it is, but it's not a very big distance between them and the rest. But it's actually really cool that they all have different strengths and weaknesses, but they're all able to contribute about equally. So I'd say we're very happy with that. It's the most varied experience of healers we had probably ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think every healer can get the basic job done. I think we made a tweak to Mistweavers, for example, to bolster their single target healing, because we really saw like challenge mode shining a light on the fact that their sustained single target throughput was on the weaker side, and we'd have challenge mode groups with the Mistweaver healer were struggling as a result. So I think it's important to have this certain sort of all-around toolkit as a baseline. But yeah, you have strengths and weaknesses, and Beacon is a signature thing the Paladins bring, whereas blanketing with HOTS or absorbs is something that's a Resto Druid or Discipline Priest niche. And the larger a raid group gets in particular, and I think we've been seeing a lot of that, especially in some of these week one, like 26, 28, 30-player raids, raiding lends to specialization to some extent. You don't have, if you have 7 healers in your 30-player raid, you're probably not going to tell all 7, like, okay, all of you just kind of do specialized. It's like, no, okay.
Right. Yeah.
You have a few people focused on keeping the tanks up, and then people who are maybe have a more specialized toolkit for raid healing will do that, and that's totally fine and interesting.
Okay.
Well, there was a lot of talk from Mistweaver Monks specifically about the way that their healing was working. Do you feel like the way Mistweaver Monks are working right now in raids is good, or are you planning on any tweaks?
Don't have any particular tweaks planned, or we'll obviously be collecting more feedback if there's some sort of qualitative feel where they feel like they're not having fun or they're frustrated in some way. That's something we might take a look at in the future. But performance-wise, they seem to be doing just fine.
Yeah, I think overall healers are happy. Like I think I've seen people tweeting about logs, like how close healers are on different fights. Like the bar color moves around based on the fight, based on the damage coming out. But I think right now they're all really happy with how they all can help each other out in a way. They feel like a healing team more than like everyone's fighting the Discipline Priest to actually heal something. So
yeah, I mean, ultimately, when overhealing percent is lower, healing feels better as a general rule. And we spend so much of Mists with like 70% overhealing, just being what you routinely saw, which is also a big part of why Disc Priests were so good, because the inherent property of an Absorb is that it's basically a heal that can't overheal. And when most healing is like 70% overheal, that becomes incredibly good by comparison. Once overhealing gets down to 30%, or, you know, like in some challenge modes, we've been seeing like 10% overhealing. And I think once you get into Mythic progression, you'll start to see some really low overhealing numbers also. There's just a better overall balance and a better overall feel to what healers are doing.
Right.
And they actually have to heal tanks again. That's a plus.
Yeah, they do. A little
Yep.
bit. Which, I'll get into that a little bit more specifically about that issue or that side problem. It was brought up too, do you guys have... We want to keep healing as it is now throughout the whole expansion. We don't want Heroic Lich King healing where you're either alive or dead. So are you going to be obviously monitoring how close that is, but do you have like ways to keep that like damage paradigm throughout the whole expansion sort of similar? So healers like feel doing the same job the whole expansion without having like, oh my gosh, suddenly I'm terrible.
Some things that are going to help with that. The amount of health you get per stamina is actually pretty high compared to what it has been in the past. It used to be you had a lot of base health, and now base health is gone, so it's directly proportionate to your stamina. So what used to happen was people's spell power was rising faster than people's health. And that meant in order to challenge the healers, you had to hit harder and harder and harder percentage of the bar. It's going to be a lot more tight this time. The other thing is that the amount of spirit available in the game isn't as much because it's so restricted on how many slots. So your mana regen is not going to climb by as much. Right. So it would be really hard for it to get as out of control as it was in the
and to some extent, when your mana regen climbs, you're probably getting more haste along the way.
Right.
So I think our goal is, I mean, it's hard to, with all the different scaling factors involved, keep it completely constant from start to finish.
Be way better.
But, you know, months from now and many raid bosses down the line, our hope would be that, you know, a tank is still getting hit for roughly a similar percentage of their health bar, and a healer is healing for a similar percentage of their health bar. Just those absolute numbers are much larger.
Okay. All right.
Now, what about the ever-burning candle?
Yeah, this was
it's really good.
We need to take a hard look at that.
It's really good, yeah.
There were some.
If it's
There was a
supposed to
little
be
bit
that
confusion on the hot fixes they're done on that, so it should be a hard look at it to make sure it's okay.
I mean, I think to some extent we've taken that hard look. Like we've you know done a couple of rounds of trinket tweaks. There were some that ended up being misbudgeted. At this point, we realized, kind of like we announced, you know, we're probably
done.
We're not looking to nerf anything. You know, we buffed a lot of the raid trinkets by comparison to keep them desirable, keep them feeling good. But particularly when you're dealing with BOEs, you know, you don't want the person who just went out and spent 100,000 gold on a candle to suddenly feel like that was wasted.
We'll keep an eye on it. It may mean if it turns out it is too much more powerful than the trinkets, it may mean we have to actually bring up some other trinkets to match it.
Like, I mean, early math now is that it's roughly equivalent to like 424 spirit, which is like, if you compare it to the Hourglass, which is the 665 crafted, that's only like, what is it, 293 of the same eye level?
There's no question that it's over budget. Like, it's a really good trinket. You should probably go get one. If you get one from your salvage yard, you won the lottery. Grats. It's not tremendously different though from, you know, there have usually been trinkets, and that's something we run into with trinkets, right? Like if we made all of our trinkets as like it's primary stat and passive secondary stat, then they're really easy to balance.
And
where
really
they
boring.
have different procs on use effects, they're trying to do different things. Some of them end up just being stronger than others, and wouldn't be the first time, like Dark Moon cards, for example, in Mists lasted all the way through Heart of Fear, and that was like a level 476 trinket that you were using alongside or often over a 509 from Heroic Heart of Fear. So it happens here and there, but to some extent, you know, it's an item that's theoretically available to anyone. If there's not,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, do you like how that works with a trinket that's available to pretty much everyone being better? Like you brought up the example of last expansion where it happened before. Like we've all seen it happen with the cards. You think it's okay that a BOE will last you through the first tier and possibly into the second, even if you're doing Mythic rating?
I think it's, in order for trinkets to be interesting, dynamic, and constantly a little bit different each time you get a trinket, so it's a risk we have to take, and it's better to have the risk that some trinket is too powerful than have trinkets be boring, like one of them.
That said, I think
we have some stat sticks in this expansion.
If we're having this conversation 2 months ago, I think the answer is, yep, we're going to nerf the candle.
Right.
Okay.
But once it's out there, you know, once people have gotten it, have saved up for it, have passed on other trinkets, or actually planned their gear sets around it. You know, that's not to say sometimes when things are just extremely egregious and just so far out of whack that it's going to distort the game in a broader sense, we have to nerf things even when people already have them, and we know that's frustrating. We know it's upsetting, but it's something we do as a last resort. And it's like, yeah, the candle's really good, but at the end of the day, the amount of mana that it's giving you on use, it's, yes, it has an extra spirit equivalency, but you're talking about like a handful of extra heals that you can get off over the course of an entire raid encounter.
Right.
It's not going to make or break the game. There's going to be some encounter where it's like, oh, if only our healer had a candle, we wouldn't have wiped. I don't think we're going to see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's fair. That I guess if it's something that people have already bought on live, then that would be really disappointing to see all of that work go to waste.
Yeah. All right, that's fair. All right, DPS time for a little bit now, and then we'll go back to another healer thing. You mentioned Windwalker monks earlier, Ian, as sort of being I don't know if they're like a problem child to balance right now for you guys, where if you take away the damage you wanted them to do, then like there'll be this huge disparity of like who can really, really be awesome on Windwalker, who can not feel like they're doing much. So, I mean, my question was, is there too much damage in Tiger Eye Brew timing? Like, should more damage be put elsewhere and then Tiger Eye Brew be not 60% damage done? Like, how does Windwalker Monk suit you guys? What do you guys got to think about that for Windwalker?
I mean, I think the big problem is that, like we said, they're doing a little bit too much damage for having as good cleave as they have. I'm not sure the mechanics need any big change, and you're unlikely to see a big change in mechanics in even 6.1 or 6.2. We in this expansion, we don't anticipate changing the mechanics on the classes unless there's some kind of a crisis, some kind of a problem.
Okay.
But you will see numerical tweaks when somebody's just too good. So that's really what Windwalker, if they are too good, that's where you're going to see it addressed.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously, and we're looking at multiple strata. Definitely, for example, using Warlocks again, my favorite example for Mists, dot snapshotting and maximizing dot snapshotting was yielding much higher end results among top tier rating Warlocks compared to what the average player was doing, which is part of why we focused on that type of issue where early on in Siege of Orgrimmar we nerfed Unerring Vision of Lei Shen in particular, rather than nerf the class as a whole. If we're seeing something that's overperforming at the high end but actually not overperforming around sort of the median of the curve, then yeah, we can adjust and tailor our tweaks accordingly.
Okay, fair enough. We talked about Mistweavers a little earlier, and I jumped ahead on that one. So I'll take a little bit of Shaman talk right now, as it is the class that I play, and then we'll jump down actually to Paladin, and then we'll come back up around there. So there's a couple issues right now with Shaman, just a little bit one. Can Liquid Magma needs to, could it buff the Shaman instead of the Totem, so that when you have to replace the Totem, or it dies, or it gets killed by AoE, or whatever, you can replace it and not lose your talent? Could that be a thing? Because right now it buffs the Totem, and Totem timing it to proc and not have like your Totem die during it, you lose damage, or waiting for it is a loss of damage.
That's something you can take a look at. It's going to really depend on how the three talents in that row are being received. If it's perceived as that's the best talent, but it has this downside, well, maybe it's okay to have a downside. Maybe not. Maybe it just feels crappy. So that's something we'll be looking at carefully.
Yeah, that seems like a very reasonable suggestion, though.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was other things too. Well, we've talked about how like if a class must have a niche like AoE, hence someone's as a whole feel like, oh, Fire Nova feels awesome, but then everything else is kind of like meh. Would you look at maybe bringing down Fire Nova to not be the is-all best AoE almost in the entire game right now, and then give us more single targets? Or
Enhanced is not doing less single target damage because of Fire Nova. It's more of the Enhanced is probably a little bit too low on its single target damage, and independent of that, Fire Nova actually was nerfed a few times during beta, and it probably still a little too good. It was outrageously good before.
Now, what about the sound on Magma Totem?
What? Oh no! Why, Anna? What? That's not.
It's a little loud.
No, that's not even in the notes. What are you doing to me? Fair.
If we have complaints about the sound, we could always make it so only the caster hears loud sound. There's a different sound for everybody else.
Okay. So. There were questions brought up too about how the pruning went with Shaman. We didn't feel like we lost anything. Earthshock became Frostshock, and we lost 2 cooldowns and gained 2 cooldowns, so nothing really changed. And even our damage sources are still the most in the game. So would you ever actually remove Flame Tongue Totem and make Wind Fury worth it? Fire Blast from Fire Elemental is pointless. Can you just remove that ability and put its damage into auto attacks or Immolate? And then Elemental Fusion. And then Storm Elemental is wicked weak right now. So just those little things. Have you? So
there's a few issues you brought up there.
Right. Of course.
The first is in the pruning. I think the pruning on a lot of classes is incomplete.
Okay.
One of the things that happened, and you're really showing this, is we got rid of some stuff and classes felt a lot cleaner, and that revealed some more stuff that probably could go too. So it's going to take us a while to really get all the classes completely cleaned up, pure, and feeling like they have all the right buttons and not more stuff they need. As you mentioned, Shaman has too many damage sources and makes you feel like you're doing a whole bunch of little things instead of lots of big hits. So
Right.
Something we'll definitely be taking a look at in the future. You're not going to see change in, like, again, the 6.1 or 6.2 time frame, but
Okay.
it's something we'd like to clean up on the class in general. Then as far as talents, we did not get the talents balanced as well against each other, especially the level 100 talents, as we would have liked.
Okay.
So it's something that you will see, I think, in 6.1
Yeah.
and 6.2 is talents that are underperforming but fun will probably get buffs to bring them up.
Okay.
Talents that everyone skips because nobody likes it may just stay that way and get replaced in the next expansion. But if a talent is just people want to take this talent, but they can't because it's not good enough, that's something we're definitely going to want to fix.
Okay. That sounds like a blanket for everyone now at 6.1.
Yeah, that covers
Yeah.
a lot of classes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the level 100 talent rows
Correct.
are not balanced anywhere near as well as we'd like them to be.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think it was just there with the pruning in particular and other scaling changes. There was just a lot of change
Yes.
that happened to classes, and just difficult to get the talent balance within each row nailed down to the point that we would have liked it. But it's a work in progress.
All right. That's
yeah,
fine.
well, that's
And
good.
we'll focus mostly on, like, if there's a talent, like, say there's a talent that everyone takes, 80% of players take because it has the highest DPS throughput, and they don't take the other two because they're a little bit lower damage. The right answer is to bring those other two up so they're competitive,
Right.
not to nerf the one that is too
Yeah.
high.
Okay.
Oh, I
That's
know
fair.
which class we can talk about next on that topic.
What do you want to go to?
Let's talk about warriors.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
Chat really wants us to discuss warriors. I'd
Alright,
bring
go
up
for it.
paladins, except that I don't want any paladin changes. So let's discuss warriors. Let's discuss warriors.
All right.
What is going on with gladiator?
I think Gladiator ended up being a little bit too high single target compared to Arms and Fury. Arms and Fury ended up a little too low, so you're likely to see Arms and Fury brought up too, so that people don't feel like they have to be Gladiator. At the same time, Gladiator's a novelty. It's the first time had to be able to do this shield and one-hander style that a lot of people wanted for a long time. So there's a lot of excitement around it, and it's outperforming the other single target. Then yes, there's going to be a huge flock of people running to play it. At the same time, I've heard tons of positive feedback from people who played Arms Warriors back in the Lich King and Burning Crusade areas who are really happy with where Arms is now. We just got to make sure that Arms and Fury are performing as well as Gladiator is. In fact, Gladiator is intended to be about as good as they are on single target, but with a slightly weaker tool set. So when things go wrong or you need that extra utility, Gladiator doesn't have it, but Arms and Fury do.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, whenever it comes to a class that has multiple DPS specs, and Warrior, for all intents and purposes, now may as well have 3, similar to Mage, Hunter, Rogue, Warlock, etc. You know, what matters most is, and where we see there is a problem, is when a person feels like there's a spec, there's a play style that they enjoy. That they either enjoy the mechanics of the rotation or just the fantasy and the feel of playing that spec, and they feel like they can't because it's not viable. You know, if people are happy about Gladiator and loving and playing it, we don't want to change that. But to the extent that there are people who have been DPS warriors for years who now feel like, well, I have to go Gladiator, I have to start taking armor gear and doing this because it's the best DPS spec, that's not ideal.
Okay.
Well, we
Yeah.
have heard a lot of positive feedback, I think, about Gladiator, and it is
Yep.
new. Like you said, it is new and shiny, and so it's not really a bad thing for people to be doing it right at the start of the expansion.
Right.
But I think the concern that, and this is the response we're getting to your comments in chat, is that Arms. I don't know if the players, at least that we're hearing from, agree that the playstyle's in a good place.
So-
like 25% free GCDs.
So
What's wrong with that?
It's the most
Okay,
fun thing.
Honestly, what is wrong with
yes.
25% free GCD is the question to ask. If you're playing a rogue, you can't push a button on every single GCD. You're used to it. You're limited by your energy. Why is it wrong to be limited by your rage?
Well, I guess we'll see how many players really like that playstyle. Maybe you guys are right, but
No, I mean, and it's tricky. I mean, I totally understand that there are people who are playing a spec who are going to be alienated when some part of the feel of that spec is changed out from under them. It's not a type of change that we make lightly. We try to avoid tinkering where possible for exactly that reason. At the same time, I think there's some broad philosophy questions about what specs should be, what rotational gameplay should be like in our game, and where we're going with the totality of the experience of playing a given class or spec. You know, we're not trying to make a rhythm game. This is not World of Warcraft Guitar Hero Edition or DDR.
Right.
You know, if we were trying to make the game compelling to play when you're fighting a target dummy in Stormwind or Orgrimmar or your Garrison, our classes would look very different. You know, and if we were trying to make challenge and depth and complexity in that situation 100% of the time, then yes, there's room to constantly be pushing a button, you know, weaving and multitasking and tracking procs and tracking multiple resources and tracking shifting priority systems on every single spec. But that's not our game. Our goal is to make playing the game fun, not playing your class rotation fun. And those can actually come into conflict with each other. When we make a rotation that is, you know, deep and complex and sort of is a game unto itself against a target dummy, but then you're fighting Margok, or you're fighting Blackhand, or you're fighting Garrosh, or Tectis, or Blackfuse, or any number of a million bosses that have a ton of different mechanics, those gaps in your rotation actually are time to look around and think about the mechanic that's coming up next in the raid encounter. Right. And ordinary human beings, and I recognize, you know, like, yeah, if you are the guy in Method, or Paragon, or Blood Legion, you are one of the top 0.01% that can actually accomplish all this multitasking at the highest level. And even then, in those guilds, there are players that are better than others. And I actually question whether anyone can truly play our DPS specs actually at the skill cap. There's always some inherent trade-off when learning a new encounter. That's why you know, and that's part of what practice is about. So, you know, it's not to say like, okay, everyone should have massive underutilized GCDs and be sitting around twiddling your thumbs, but there's room for variety in specs, particularly on classes that have multiple DPS specs, where, you know, there are options, and through talents, we want to give you the ability to customize and opt into more complexity and more procs, more GCD utilization if you want that. But I very much dispute like the baseline that a well-designed class or spec needs to utilize all or even almost all of its GCDs in order to be well-designed or fun.
Well, there's a difference between 0% free GCDs and 25%. And I mean, I don't think anyone's arguing that you have to fill every GCD.
Right.
But the arms people are arguing that it feels too slow right now, which is
Sure.
I mean, all of
And
the things that you just said can still be true, and yet it can still be.
Just I can come back with, there are a bunch of people coming back from Burning Crusade and Lich King era who say this feels just like it used to feel. Thank you. So you have to make a compromise between these groups of people.
Yeah, and that's the flip of that too. Is like, I mean, in my personal perspective, because I play Enhancement, you gave us Sanctity of Battle, which Paladins had, and Paladins the same. My alt is a Ret Pally as well, and I classify those classes as negative downtime, where I have to cut buttons to hit buttons that are worth more than other buttons, whereas like Arms Warrior can't even hit all their buttons. There's huge like shifts, and Hunters sort of fall into that range. We have to wait for focus, or Rogues wait for their energy. So there are some classes, the ones that usually don't have this system, like a rage, energy, focus system, or like a Ret Pally is in terms of mana. All we do is hit every button in a priority list, and we're hitting a button every cooldown, and we have to skip some now and then too. So like, that was a topic I actually kind of skipped over, but you brought it back up again. Is that's fine to have, I suppose? Is that sort of like how classes are supposed to be inherently back and forth?
I think you're going to see more of a trend towards the complexities being talent options instead of baseline rotation to a lot of classes, and having a little bit more freed up GCDs in general. I think you're going to see that happen over time. Not going to do it all tomorrow, but.
And I think there's also room for classes that have multiple DPS specs of the same role. And when I say role, I tend to count ranged and melee DPS as different roles in terms of their feel. Because it's not reasonable to say, like, oh, you don't like Enhance anymore, well, now play Elemental. You're still a Shaman. Like, that's a pretty big deal in terms of the difference between the two. But when you have a class that has multiple spec options, I think we do want to try to offer more options in terms of playstyle. And that does mean that for some people who've been playing one spec for years, there's the unfortunate, outcome that you may feel that you find something changed out from under you that you don't find enjoyable anymore. And we understand that can be very frustrating. We totally, listen to and give a lot of validity to that feedback. But we want to offer multiple different playstyles where possible within a class that has multiple specs of a given role.
Right. I mean, the backwards comment on this is always that if you play a caster, you always have to hit a button because you're always casting a spell. Now, that's also intuitive to some sort of downtime, because as you're casting, you're not, like, hitting another button.
You're channeling a spell instead of pushing a button, so there is inherent downtime there.
But our other classes, again, are very, very different in that regard. And I think with Ret Pally and Enhancement being the ones that gain and are faster as we gain gear because of haste, we already have to cut buttons now. We'll have to, like, either cut more in the future, or really just like kind of
I
forget.
don't
like,
have to cut buttons.
No,
you
you
may
don't.
have to cut buttons.
I mean, we already almost never hit frost shock. Doesn't even like it happens sometimes. But like, so why is it even there in the first place? Like these kind of things we talked about in the beta, and some classes back and forth on this. So
Yeah. Also keep in mind that every button is about raiding. Some buttons are about PvP. Some buttons are about solo play. So
Sure.
sometimes you're like, why do I have this button? Well, it's actually not for your playstyle.
okay.
Well, I
Alright.
know we have a whole lot of classes to get through here, so I'm going to move us along to another one.
Let's do Prot Warrior.
All right, let's do Prot Warrior. What are your thoughts towards Shield Barrier? Do you feel like it's too weak right now, or is it working as intended?
I think we're just going to watch really carefully to make sure that all the tanks are viable. There's some complaining that it's too weak, but we're not. There's also a lot of anecdotal feedback that warriors are a really, really strong tank. So as we see the different tanks, are they all being taken to each encounter? Are people saying you can't use a tank on this, or you have to use a tank on this other encounter? That's when we'll see if there's a real problem there or not. It's hard to say yet.
I mean, the goal with Shield Barrier is for it to be sort of the flat absorb alternative to Shield Block, which is inherently percentage reduction. Resolve helps keep those two things, roughly in parity, or should.
Right.
I mean, and if we find that Shield Barrier really is being tremendously underutilized at multiple different levels of play, that's something we'll adjust.
Right.
But yeah, like Chris said, I mean, I think Prot Warrior was probably the de facto strongest raid tank for most of beta. And there have been a couple of tweaks made and buffs to other tanks.
Right.
So we want to be careful about, buffing what's already on top.
Yeah, that's fine. I think the only argument right now is that like even with like resolve and challenge mode with like an actual amount of it, you barrier for like 6,000 or so. Like it doesn't feel like it even happens. Opposed to like shield blocking melee attack, which feels great. That was the one thing that Prot Warriors came to me about. So all right. So a little bit of Blood Death Knight right here. I know that beta testing people were really kind of adamant about that your main ability now is a Blood Death Knight to spam Blood Boil as an AoE, and on single target it feels kind of like is Heart Strike really gone forever as a single target source? It seems like they don't really do anything with their actual weapon to some degree because Rune Strike's also gone.
So we think the mistake we made on Blood Death Knights is they feel too magic right now, and they're not using their weapon enough. And that's something I imagine will rectify in future designs. It's not something you're going to see changed immediately because there's a lot of rework to do there, but we definitely want to make them feel like they're using their weapon more, bring them a little bit more towards strikes and less constantly oozing magical effects. At the same time, we were getting a lot of feedback that people weren't using Heart Strike, they just used Blood Boil, right? So it was sort of like there were these redundant buttons. So we need to bring them back to having strikes, but not make them feel like they're redundant effects.
Okay. That's what I've heard. I mean, even like beta testing it, I felt weird with one mob, and I was like, rah, 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 and that's all I was doing. And that's sort of like, I didn't use my weapon ever.
Yeah.
So, okay. Anna, do Paladin right now, Anna. There's a couple little things. In here for
No,
Paladin.
let's not talk about Paladins. I don't want
Yeah,
Paladins.
well, this is the first one. Isn't even a big deal. The this one that comes in is like, why are Might and Kings separate still, whereas other buffs are consolidated or give 2 buffs in one button?
So Paladin is one of the few classes as a choice between giving 2 different raid buffs that are identical to what other classes give. So you give Kings, well, that overwrites a Druid's Mark of the Wild, and the Mark of the Wild's all they have, right? So they have a choice between 2 different buffs. Warrior is similar; you can do Commanding Shout or Battle Shout, and that's why they have 2 because they have that choice. Maybe they shouldn't have a choice. Maybe they just have one of those 2 buttons.
Yeah, hunters get a choice as well. I always like always liked being able to choose because then I actually have to look at the people in my dungeon group. What about empowered seals? This was a talent that a lot of us were really excited about when we saw it come up, and then it's turned out to be a little bit disappointing in real life. Not that I dislike our other options at level 100, but are you planning to make any tweaks to empowered seals to make it at least worth looking at for Prot or for Ret?
I think if it's not worth using, that's something that people are excited about it. It's something they can address numerically, bring it up to snuff. Like I said, the level 100 talents aren't balanced as tightly against each other as you would have liked them to be. There were too many changes late in beta to get them straight. But as we're collecting data from live, it'll be really easy for us to see what needs buffing and what doesn't. And I would expect by around 6.1, you're going to see a lot more equality in the level 100 talents.
Yeah,
good.
That was like a problem child one that was brought up with a lot of like volition about that level 100 in particular, about any other class. So, but you prefaced that by saying that a lot of them are being looked at for later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of something that like the design is really cool, and it would be nice if it was worth using, and so maybe we'll see some changes in the future.
Right. Yep.
I know that one of the classes that chat will just like completely strangle us if we don't bring up would be mages. Mages have been complaining quite a bit to us, and I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on the mage specs. How do you feel like those are working out? Are there any tweaks that are planned for the mages these days?
Fire and Arcane are pretty low,
Yep.
I would say,
Yeah.
in particular.
Okay.
Right.
Frost, like even Frost might
Even
be
Frost
a
is
touch
low.
low as well. They're much closer to being solid. There's a reason why you can look at Warcraft logs and it's like 96% of Mage parses or something are Frost.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, and that just falls back into that same category we talked about earlier, where if the spec you enjoy playing is Fire or the spec you enjoy playing is Arcane, we want you to feel like that is viable. Now, given niches, there might be some fights where one spec shines more than another, but right now, yeah, those specs are pretty consistently behind, and some of that's the usual product of crit scaling for Fire mages and all of that.
Yeah.
And it's a good example of a case where there's an interesting phenomenon where we don't know how far ahead Frost really is. We just know that Arcane and Fire are enough behind that nobody's playing them.
Yeah.
And so all the best players aren't playing Fire and Arcane, which makes them look even more behind than they really are. So we'll be doing some modest buffs, and we suspect that it won't take a lot to see those numbers rise a lot.
Okay.
It was always some feedback that we got from mages and warlocks when we had them on the show last year, where the warlocks would say that they had different specs that shined in different encounters, and then mages would say, like, well, we have X spec at the top, and then we're always going to play this spec. And I feel like hopefully that's something that you guys are going to be changing for mages moving forward.
We plan to.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, even in Mists, I think you saw a pretty decent mix of, I think, Fire and Arcane most of the time, and both specs were pretty solidly viable for much of the expansion. I think it's specific trinkets and specific things and encounters that become a primary focus of players' attention may push some towards one or the other. But yeah, our goal is if you like playing a spec, you should be able to do it and be competitive.
Right. Okay. And that comes with
good. I'm sure the mages really wanted to hear that.
That comes with fixing the sandwich right now, I'm assuming. So I know you guys talked about how you needed the numbers from, like, Dungeons gave you some, but you needed that first week of rating to really get numbers. So, okay. I mean, and chat room's freaking out about all the different classes and like that. They have already said that numbers are going to be probably coming out tomorrow. Some 5 to 10-ish. Ian said about 5-ish percentage kind of things tomorrow.
And not everyone's going to see changes. If your class doesn't see changes, it means we think that you're actually in a pretty good place and towards the middle of the group, and you're not overpowered or underpowered.
Okay.
I don't know why you guys aren't just putting every spec at the top of the meters. Like, don't you understand?
Why doesn't that happen?
I know, it's like all these people out there that are middle of the pack. Middle of the pack is just useless.
Yeah,
I mean, who wants someone who's middle
I
of the
know,
pack?
right? Jeez, like
we're
might as well sit on the bench.
It's like we're playing Mario Kart in the Rat Pack after your 3rd to 10th place right there. It's terrible. That's the whole point, though. You want to always be in that. If you're way up there or way down below, that's the problem.
Well, I got one more question on mages before we move off of them, and that's
goodness
because
gracious.
Rune of Power gets mentioned every single time the mages come up. Are you happy with this gameplay? I mean, you clearly haven't taken it out, so is this something that you want mages to be able to do? To just put a rune on the ground and stand in it?
Yes.
Some people really like it.
Yeah. I think
mean,
it's cool, but the
I love
mages
it.
apparently whine about it. So
Well, again, and I think that falls back into that talent balance
issue
issue that we talked about earlier. I think if it feels like it's far and away the best choice, and yes, particularly for Arcane, because mana was such a big deal for them, when Arcane became the dominant spec for a period of time in Mists, everyone there gravitated towards Rune of Power because mana regen meant so much more for Arcane than it did for the other specs. And then in turn, you just felt forced into that playstyle whether you liked it or not. If you hate the playstyle but feel forced into it, that's always going to be a problem for us.
Yeah.
That's useful feedback for us to hear, and that's part of why when we look at a talent that's being utilized by like 98% of players, that's almost more dangerous and more problematic than the talent that's only being used by 2% of players. Right. Because some percent of those 98% probably really don't like that talent, but they feel like they have to take it.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, fair enough. Speaking of the talent to take, that was the next part I'll bring in here. Do you have anything to go on that, Anna? Are you good?
No, I was going to move on. Go ahead.
That brings up Holy Paladins with double Beacon. Beacon of Light, Beacon of Faith. It almost feels like it's a mandatory pick right now. So is that too strong? Would it become baseline, or plans to fix this talent to make the other ones more competitive?
I doubt we'd ever make it baseline, so it's more about fixing the other talents to be competitive. Like, Paladin numbers aren't wrong. Paladin's about where they need to be compared to the other healers, so that means the other two talents just need to be brought up to where it is.
Okay. Yeah, it just right now in the way that the meta is shifted with like 2 tanks in pretty much every fight, it makes it sort of like you bring a Holy Paladin and a Discipline Priest to keep your tanks alive. And you bring double Beacon, so you can heal both of them at the same time. So then if that's the planned, That's old school Paladin, arguably. That harkens back to 2 expansions ago. If that's the plan, then I think Holy Paladins can be like, hey, my job's back, I suppose. But I guess that's their role. So if that's okay with you guys, that's the plan.
It's a role they can opt into by taking that talent. But again, we'd like to have the other 2 talents be good options if you want to do something a little bit different.
Okay.
It's just they need to be brought up numerically.
All right. A side caveat is that apparently Denounce is being animated and casted as not as an offensive spell anymore. You cast it like a heal. Is that just an animation mismatch there?
We'll take a look at the visual on that. There may have been some miscommunication and the wrong visual got attached. We can look carefully at it.
Yeah, you cast like a heal and your arm goes up in the air and the thing throws out of your face instead of you actually casting it offensively. Yeah.
We did a huge pass on visuals, not just the AoEs, but all the single target spells, trying to bring down the noise of things that were unnecessarily noisy. And it's possible somebody just made a mistake and attached the wrong visual when we were going through it.
That's fine. It was just it was brought up. Cool.
Yep.
And I want to bring up Shadow Priests right now and this craziness going on with them real quick.
Yeah, so Shadow Priests are feeling like they're being forced into taking Clarity of Power and then doing the dot weaving. Is that just another example of something that needs to be tweaking?
Great example of that. Yeah. Clarity of Power is intended as well, you know what, I'm tired of being the guy who does dots all the time. I want to do something a little bit different this time around. And if it's the best talent, then everybody feels like they have to do that, even if they didn't want to change their playstyle. So it's a great example of what Ian's talking about, where somebody's forced to play in a way they don't want to. And we just need to bring those other 2 talents up to make them as viable as
I think there's a lot of questions that we have that are kind of like that, but our viewers will be very disappointed if we don't ask all of them, and all of them are going to be like, well, the other options are just not good enough yet.
And the things they can be securing is that we're going to focus on taking the weak talents and bringing them up, not nerfing the strong talent, because we feel like otherwise the numbers in the game are in a pretty good place. So you're not going to see a lot of nerfs to talents.
Okay. Yeah, well, then that's just a matter of waiting to see what the changes are going to be like.
Right. All right.
Now, I want to move on to Balanced Druids. What about the new model for Eclipse? Is it here to stay? Are you happy with how that is working?
I think we're still waiting to see how players react to it, what the overall feedback is. We feel it's a lot better than what they had. I'm not sure it's ultimately the best rotation they could possibly have, but it's much more interesting than what they had before the changes. So
I think,
in that respect, we're happy.
I think a lot of I know for some people it almost seemed like a kind of random change, like, whoa, why did you change balance so much? I think one of the big problems that we saw with balance, in terms of what it had turned into, was that it was actually this super proc-driven reactive class. It was mostly just about, responding to Star Surge procs, and that was pushing the bar erratically for you, and you were shifting so quickly from one side to the other, from lunar to solar and back, that this cadence that had originally been designed in just wasn't happening, and it just felt like, okay, push the button that lights up, rather than plan out which side you're going to be on.
It was also, in order to figure out how to play a balanced druid, we read a whole lot of tooltips and a whole lot of procs, and a whole lot of things going on, but what you actually did was fairly simple. So it came into that sort of hard to learn, easy to master that is the opposite of what we want on a class. So we're trying to find something that's more interesting than what they had and easier to figure out and learn.
Yeah, I just heard that balanced druids right now feel they're always playing catch up. They're always chasing their class instead of actually influencing their class. So that's the one thing I've heard. And now they're almost forced to take celestial alignment so they can actually move their bar when they want to, instead of just doing it themselves with the rotation. So that's
totally valid feedback. Yeah.
I
mean,
very valid feedback.
There's definitely room, for us to listen and tweak more with that vision.
Okay. And also for Boomkin Love here, because this is one of those that come up all the time, kind of denounce these little things. Toys and transmogging your character model can't really be affected for druids because they're always either a chicken or the glyph that makes them the sparkly one. But if you go into a form, it doesn't actually work properly.
So we have a change plan for that actually, for druid forms. Right now, when you look at shapeshifts and transforms, the priorities put on the shapeshifts always shows instead of the transform.
Okay.
That is done primarily so that in a PvP combat you can tell who you're fighting, so you can't hide the fact that you're a bear instead of being a Noggenfogger skeleton.
Right.
We're talking about making some changes so that outside of competitive PvP, you would actually see the transform instead of the druid shapeshift.
Ooh.
So they could have all of that playing around everybody else does. They could, if they want to be a Noggenfogger skeleton all the time like a mage, they can.
They want to turn to Millhouse Manastor when they can't do it.
Yep.
I mean, come on. Yeah, there we go.
That's awesome. The Sky Mirror is the best. You need to be like your BFF. Yeah, you need to look like your BFF.
Exactly.
Right. It would still, in arena, you would always look like your proper form, but outside of it, You can play around.
Yeah, exactly like Chris said. The reason why I made that call was just because some forms actually had like valuable combat gameplay information,
Right.
like seeing that a Resto Druid had just gone bare, or that a flag carrier was shifting to travel form. Stuff like that was a big deal. We didn't want it concealed, but we can target that much more narrowly.
Now, one caveat on that is if you are a mountable travel form, that will still always take the very highest priority
I hope
because
so.
otherwise it looks terribly
I hope
stupid.
we don't have to run around have like mounts on top of Millhouse Manstorm again. He's carrying someone on his back. Like, come on,
You do not want that.
No, okay, good. All right. But I think that change would be awesome for the transforming classes, because that's a... I mean, you fixed it a little bit too, because I know beforehand, if as a shaman again, if I ascended, I would lose my transform.
Yes.
Now I can ascend and come back out and I'm still gammon.
Or I remember doing the long strange trip at Christmas. You had to be a gnome and go into a battleground.
Yeah.
And as a druid, it just meant I would find some siege engine to ride on and do nothing, because as a feral druid and I couldn't do anything.
Couldn't do anything. Oh,
now you actually go back to the transform every time you leave your shapeshift. So it's just more improvement on those lines.
Okay, well that's great. I'm sure the druid community would revel in that. They don't have to always be Broccoli Man. That'd be good.
Because I know shapeshifting is part of being a druid, but then there have always been these little quality of life things that druids have wanted to hear. So that's good to hear an update on.
Can't take use of the toy box. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question about, I just want to move us on to one more class here. I know we're kind of pressed for time, but the warlocks will literally cry tears of fire if we don't ask
literally green fire.
Literally cry tears of green fire. Yeah, exactly. The warlocks would like to hear about Reign of Fire, first of all. Are you happy with the place that's in, or are you planning any changes to the way Reign of Fire is working?
We're still looking at it carefully. The part of the problem that happened there is we had one spec of Warlock that was the best at everything, at single target, at cleave, and at AoE. And that was something we felt we needed to address. It probably wasn't the right time and place to address it in a hotfix, but that's done. In the future, we'd like to look more towards them being better at single target and better at Bane of Havoc cleave damage, rather than giving them back being amazing at AoE. That being said, they may need some other sources of embers to help feel a little better. We'll be looking at it.
I think the other problem there was with something like Reign of Fire, which really, like, you read that tooltip and everything about that tooltip says this is an AoE spell that was just being a core part of their single target rotation, which was just less than ideal. Again, the way that hotfix went out and the sort of the suddenness of the change, I think we would do it differently if we could go back, but that was another one of the problems that we were trying to solve.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's understandable. I know that before that went out, I was hearing from warlocks like address Reign of Fire in the single target rotation, and they were talking about wanting more sources of embers. So I'm sure they'll be glad to hear about the changes that you guys, or at least the thoughts that you guys have on those.
Yep.
Do you feel like ember generation is in a good place? Or does it need a little bit of tweaking at this point?
I think it may need a little bit of tweaking, but we're going to be looking carefully at it as we collect more data, seeing what change we make. It might be something that we may not change until 6.1 to make sure we make a good change rather than this sort of on-the-fly change like the hotfix was.
Yeah, but we recognize it's a pretty big feel thing, right?
Yes.
Like, Fire and Brimstone is inherently sustainable on its own against, like, 1 million targets just because of Immolate, but there's kind of that middle ground of, like, 4 or 5 things where you used to be able to sustain it, and now you can't.
You can't.
And that feels like a very big change, a larger than intended change, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why would it not be something like you needed to require a certain number of targets for it to generate embers? I know there are other spells in the game.
We're exploring ideas like that.
Is interesting.
That's exactly how.
Okay. Yeah, because some abilities have a amount they need, but they kind of like it scales with the amount you have it spread to, kind of thing.
Exactly, and I think that's the kind of thing we've done elsewhere. I think part of the problem with that, and one of the limitations, which hopefully someday we can get past with our ability to hotfix things, is that we can't hotfix text on your client. We can't hotfix strings and localize and translate it into a bunch of different languages. And so when you hotfix in like this special case rule, it could be like, if Reign of Fire hits more than 3 targets, it now generates embers. That would feel inconsistent and arbitrarily buggy to most players who hadn't happened to read that obscure hotfix note.
They didn't discover that it works that way, so they don't know how to take advantage of it. It's just it's too much hidden information.
Okay, that's fair. I want to back us up a little bit too, because it was in the notes, and I guess it grazed over because I think on the Shadow Priest topic, Mind Seer was a big issue, because I know their playstyle for AoEing is to like cross dot everything and then like kind of just Mind Seer when you're not cross dotting. But I mean, from me looking from the outside in, is there a way that like Mind Seer would actually work as the AoE version of Devouring Plague with your Shadow Orbs instead of putting up more single target dots on multiple targets? Like, would there be something love coming to Mind Seer?
we really think that Shadow Priest should be about multi-dotting. That's really their strength.
Okay.
And so that we're unlikely to make a lot of change towards making you do Mindseer instead. There's actually kind of a funny space there. Mindseer and Mindflay are competing with each other, and if Mindseer gets a little bit better, then all of a sudden it starts beating Mindflay in a single target fight.
Okay.
It's kind of what holds it down. And it's really Mindseering instead of dotting is not our vision for the Warlock class. So
Okay.
I think it's not the direction we'd probably go.
Okay. Wanted to confirm that. All right. And Anna, I think the last one is on you. A little bit
Oh,
about
the
it.
last one. We get
Right.
rogues, right? Because the rogues are like throwing a fit.
What about us? What about us?
What about us?
They're all invisible. We can't
There's
see
never
you.
rogue patch notes.
No, well, there are
Right, no,
so few rogues that play the game. No, just kidding.
Oh, wow.
I know, but the rogues would like to know how are you feeling about rogue performance, about the different specs? Is there anything that you're planning on changing? What are your thoughts on rogues right now?
We haven't really seen any data that shows that they need a lot of change. And I suspect that almost every rogue out there is still adjusting to the fact that their combo points stick around when they change targets, and Hilly hasn't mastered that yet, but we'll see how it plays
How do you
out.
feel about that change? How has that been working out?
It's really interesting. It changes dramatically how you play. It's just a
Right.
different way of thinking, and I haven't wrapped my mind around it completely as a player yet. I'm sure a lot of people in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we've seen pretty solid performance. Actually, it's one of those cases where there's a decent variety in the specs. You know, you think you have people playing combat and assassination who have been for a long time, still doing so and getting good results. People checking out subtlety, which is always cool whenever that pops up. But yeah, I think they're a solid class that we're seeing pretty well represented.
I think
but keep an
I
eye on
know
the data.
subtlety rogues were not generally a spec that we saw played a whole lot last expansion, so it's
Nope.
nice to see them a bit more now. The assassination is the spec that I think most people have concerns about at this time.
I think it's just the AoE concern with rogues in general, where they feel that they only have like one thing they can do, and then it's all that it does. And like, because combat can kind of cleave a little bit, and assassination can, fan it out, and then subtlety really doesn't have a lot. But are rogues more meant to be single targeting and not really like AoE kings?
Well, it's spec by spec to an extent, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, you have some options, but yeah, Blade Flurry is better at cleave. And Assassination, when you're fanning poisons onto lots and lots of targets at once, that's going to make them shine. The alternative would be that they're all equally good at single target and all equally good at AoE.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that waters down the specs. I mean, again, there are boundaries here, right? If your AoE is just completely abysmal to the point that, like, if the fight involves AoE, you're worthless, well, then we've gone too far.
Right.
Or if it's like old school Blade Flurry from like 5.0, where you would like, even if you hated combat with every fiber of your being, you would take out a blue mace and go combat for Garrelon because cleaving off his legs would make you top meters and beat out, fully raid geared players with your blue weapons. Well, then that's a problem too.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
a bit.
Okay. Well, all right. I think is a
well,
closing. Anything else that you have, Anna?
I mean, I have one more question for these guys because
Well, I
I'm
mean, it's up to
selfish.
them. It's their time. Like, we could sit here and talk to them
Their
for hours
time.
and hours. This is, yeah. They have kind of a closing statement and then wrap up. But if you have time for one more.
Yeah, I got one more question for these guys. And it's just because we've been looking at raids going over the last week and we've been seeing the different raid CDs. And the Hunter Fox CD is a particular concern for a lot of players. And I know that you've already spoken a little bit about the way the Hunter specs are balanced and that I know Mark's needs to come down a little bit. But how do you feel about this Hunter raid CD? Is this working out as intended? Are you seeing raids stack too many Hunters? Is it too strong? A little bit leading there too?
Fox was added partly because there was a strong feeling from the Hunter community that they had a little bit less utility they brought to the raid, and we had just recently hit the mobile damage, so there was a sort of a niche we could add there. If it proves out that Fox is too strong, then it's something we can definitely weaken or even get rid of. It's a problem. It was added because of the perception they didn't bring enough.
Yeah, I think we're not seeing Hunter stacking, but we're going to keep an eye out for it. I think it's useful. I mean, I guess one of the quirks is like the more Hunters you bring, the less useful Fox becomes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the number of people benefiting from it is going down. There's a certain cool coordination element to it. There's situations where you'll want to use it for offensive purposes. There's situations where you want to use it for healing purposes.
Right.
And that there's some nice cooperative synergy there. But yeah, obviously, if it turns into like you need to bring 3 Hunters to your Mythic raid or don't even bother,
Oh,
well,
goodness.
that's a problem.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that'll ever be a thing. You only have 20 spots in the raid in the first place anyway, so... And I think a lot of the movement we've seen, I mean, obviously we don't know. When Mythic comes out now, we'll see. You know, we're going to see like the heroic Nefarian 11 Boomkin problem again or whatever with all these hunters. But I don't think it's going to be an issue. I think because the way you time it has to be incredibly important. And if you have 7 of them, then it doesn't even matter anymore. But if you have 2, which will probably be kind of average, then it really makes the buff really powerful. And you don't have to. There's not a ton of movement, casters. Come on now, you move properly. It's not a ton of movement. You could do it. I believe in you.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So a closing topic here real quick came in, and I'm just going to go through it. I mean, it's in the notes. So you guys could read. I mean, you've read it on party right now. It's when trying to consolidate and collate feedback from a particular class, or even a range of classes. One of the biggest issues I sometimes run into is language. Now, sometimes posters will use words like scaling, broken, and then the lovely word clunky, without realizing that terms communicate very little, and it's frustrating because they're genuinely trying to provide feedback about falling into traps that don't get the message across.
So I think scaling was a word that we didn't used to see, but once we talked a lot about, well, we fixed this class because it didn't scale well. I mean, if you think back to the original 2004 WoW, there were lots of abilities that didn't get better as you got better gear, and that's where that scaling came up as a buzzword. And really what it comes down to is don't use buzzwords.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean in words that you know what they mean. And the buzzwords often mean very little. The same thing goes for politics. Really, buzzwords in politics, they end up meaning nothing.
I mean, and ultimately it's like, feedback is feedback, right? You know, you can give feedback whatever form you like, but if you want to make it the most useful, I think to some extent saying this ability is clunky is equivalent in terms of how informative it is for us to saying, well, like, this spec sucks.
I don't like
or
it.
I don't like the ability.
Yeah,
which like, we
That's
get
what it means.
We get
I
the
don't like
feedback,
it.
right? Like, but for example, even just from earlier in the show, talking about, you know, like, oh, okay, I don't like Balanced Druid because it feels like I'm not controlling my resource, I'm not controlling my class, I'm having to respond to something that's happening out of my control. Well, that's actually much better feedback, right? It's like, okay, I actually get the concern there. Or, yeah, you know, the arms rotation versus arms rotation is terrible, you should fire the person who made that spec.
Oh, God.
Alternately, you know, I don't like having 20% of my GCDs free.
All right.
And like, totally get that, right? Actionable feedback that's comprehensible versus just, you know, this sucks.
Okay.
Take the time to explain what you mean and avoid buzzwords.
Well, I think most players don't really understand that you guys want to hear, like, I don't like this, and not like they think they'll be taken more seriously if they say, like, this doesn't work right, you know, across the board, this is broken.
The more specific and detailed they can get, the better and feedback is always.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. It's hard. I think as community has grown in World of Warcraft, more and more people actually care more about their class or spec. So obviously there's noise. But I mean, we talked about this before on the show with you guys, you know, with the community team on, and there are people reading all of this feedback. I don't know why this terrible game of telephone happens. We're like, they don't listen to us. They don't care. But that's not a thing.
No, we're listening all the time.
Right.
I mean, genuinely, whether it's forums, whether it's Twitter, whether it's people's blogs, whether it's shows like this, you know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of numbers to it, but a lot of it is also about fields, about, you know, they're not subjectively answerable questions. It's trying to derive a reverse engineer fun, right? Like and that's something that experience guides us, numbers guide us in some cases, but the best way that we know if we're succeeding or failing is by listening to the community.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, to go back to the original point of the show when we opened, this was a huge expansion. So there's still lots to work on and figure out there. But gentlemen, I'm hitting the button right now because it's time.
All right.
It's time. The button is being hit. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Again, of course, if you didn't hear about your class or you missed part of what we're talking about, this will be up. I'm going to try to get this up tonight. If you're watching on YouTube right now, hello. But this will be up as soon as possible on the YouTube if you missed things. Of course, probably right up going on MMO Champion soon. And it's impossible to talk about every class and spec. I mean, honestly now, come on. There's like 75 of them right now, okay? But we'll maybe get another interview in the future. Who knows? We'll talk about more with these awesome gentlemen. Our guests today were, again, we had the awesome Kris Zierhut on here, the lead class designer. Thank you for being on the show for the first time, sir. Hopefully again.
Welcome.
That'll be very awesome. And returning again, we had Ian Hazzikostas, lead game designer. Always a pleasure, Ian.
Yeah, pleasure on my end too.
Can't wait to see Mythic Tuesday. You guys excited for Mythic?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
How are you guys gonna be like watching streams? Or are you gonna like GM mode in and watch people actually do it
Both.
live?
Yep.
Oh, yes, that's so cool. Don't watch me. I'll probably be face tanking. Don't do it. And it's Anna Fail over here. You can follow her on the Twitter at Anna Fail, right there on the Twitters.
At Anafeel, and it was great to see everybody coming out today. And I, just wanted to let everybody know that I will be leaving the show. This is probably going to be my very last time on Final Boss TV. So I really appreciate everybody coming out here to see the show. And I think we kind of ended it on a really great one here with the developers having come to talk to us about Warlords.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thanks everybody for coming out to watch it so much, and I really appreciate everyone's support. And it's been a wild ride. So and thanks a whole lot. Chad, I love you, even though I ban lots of you every day.
I feel like I've banned lots of you. Now, just to go back on that, we won't ever see her again. I think I'll try to get Anna on a couple times, but as life changes
yeah, it won't be the last
things,
time you guys see me, but yeah.
right? Yeah. Like I'm sure I'll drag you on for some episodes in the future, of course, like that. But as life changes, things happen. Anna's been here for well over a year. She's been amazing. We'll be looking for, a replacement co-host or so. We'll see how it works like that. I think I can work the show by myself for a little while. I don't know. I have a bit of a beard I can carry a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But again, thank you all very much for watching.
You'll be around, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you're not gone. Never again. Never again. So, thank you all much for watching. See you all in Draenor. Again, hype for Mythic opening this week. If you're still reading right now or getting in there, enjoy it. Trust in the tempered seal of fate. That doesn't sound as good as trusting the coin, but we'll get used to it, I guess. Thank you all so much for being here. Ian, Chris, it was a pleasure. Again, great show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Likewise.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much. And
Yeah,
we'll see
really
you.
appreciate both of you guys coming. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll see you all next week. Details about the show next week, if there is one, or who's going to be on it on social media. See you in the YouTube comments. And everyone, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye. Good luck in Heimall.